I knew from the first day I walked into a classroom as a student teacher that, what's going on? There had to be more. It had to be different. What they were being offered, more spiritually, intellectually, relationally, culturally. I thought there had to be something different, a different way for children to experience learning.
As Christians, we know we're called to live lives that are different from the world around us. This isn't aimless, but purposeful. And as parents, we know this to be true for our children and our approach to education as well. So how do we do this? How can we be thoughtfully and intentionally different in education, parenting, community, and culture? Origins show the heart, the vision, but after 2 decades, does it remain? In today's episode, we sit down with Trinity's head of school and founder, Liz Caddow, to discuss Trinity's past, present, and future. Welcome to Different by Design. All right, welcome to Different by Design. I'm Matt Dixon, and in this inaugural episode, I'm greatly looking forward to sitting down with Trinity's founder and head of school, Liz Caddow, to discuss the very title of this podcast as we explore what we really mean by different when it comes to Trinity's approach to not only education, but school and community and culture as well. So, Liz, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dixon. I'm looking forward to speaking and talking with you today.
Yeah, Liz, we talk often. And I know even throughout the years, I've caught snippets of really the reason why you wanted to start Trinity and kind of the vision that you had. But I'm particularly excited to explore that even just a little bit more as we understand your own upbringing and your background and understand how and why Trinity came into fruition. And then even looking back over the past 20 plus years to see what it is today. And I don't know, I'm curious if this is what you thought it would be. But I think it would be a good place to start there, just at the beginning of even your own life, kind of your background. I know your dad was an educator and hearing some of that, but what made you even want to get into education in the first place?
Oh, gosh. Well, as a little girl, I loved school. I loved learning. I loved going to school. Loved my teachers, loved the different subjects. But my dad as a teacher, I also enjoyed going to school with him if our school district had a day off and his didn't. And I would gather up all his things and bring them home. And as a child, I had a dedicated classroom in the little playhouse my dad built for me.
When you played school, were you the teacher or were you the head of school?
Yes. My friend Edie Eicher and I both had playhouses that were devoted classrooms.
Were you competitors?
No, we played at our house and then went to her house. And that's how we spent our weekends.
How old were you?
7, 8, 9, 6, 7. We did this.
Yeah.
And with all our stuffed animals would be our students.
And was it because your dad was an educator, or is it just because you particularly enjoyed school?
I loved school. And she did too. And her dad was a teacher.
You loved learning?
Mm-hmm. I loved learning. I loved my teachers. I loved
your friends. Social.
I just loved learning. And so, Socks would play. We'd make him sit in the room with us in this playhouse, and he was a disaster, my dog.
His name was Socks?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why'd you name your dog Socks?
Because he had 4 white legs.
I was going to say. That's funny.
And so as I grew and worked with students in my summer jobs as working with other students, and then in college doing the same, I think deep in my heart, I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but felt that I needed to do something different. So I did pursue a business degree in my undergrad experience at Arizona State University, and then graduated and went and did that for a bit. Actually moved myself to San Francisco and did that, but never stopped working with kids in my high school jobs and in my college jobs. I just thought, I need to go do what I think Jesus is telling me to do, go be a teacher. And so I was able to go to University of Southern California for their master's and credential program, and loved every minute of just being back in a school environment and learning. But I knew from the first day I walked into a classroom as a student teacher that there had to be more. It had to be different.
There had to be more that kids were capable of?
Capable of what they were being offered, more spiritually, intellectually, relationally, culturally. It was all, I felt it was like, what's going on? And I thought there had to be something different, a different way for children to experience learning.
So why did you, I'm just curious even for your background, why pursue the business degree if you knew, even growing up, I enjoy education, I love education. What was kind of your trajectory there? Because I'm sure that's something a lot of even our own students go through, of thinking as they're trying to choose their own major and discerning what God is calling them to, all of those kinds of things.
It was probably a little bit of family pressure, I felt. I wanted to go to college, and my parents were gracious in making sure I could do that, but needed to pursue, say, a particular degree. And so I did that. So honor probably what...
Yeah, feeling like this is the serious adult thing that I need to do. And
yes. So I did do that and still engaged and involved myself in that experience. But once I was done and doing some other things at 23 or so, I realized I need to just respond to what I think Jesus is telling me would be a good thing to pursue. I knew that even in college, I wanted to make a difference, have my life make a difference for other people. And I was spending every summer doing college camps and collegiate cheerleading camps, all these things with...
We know you're still a cheerleader.
It's so true.
Deep down.
Oh my gosh.
For our students.
Everyone. I mean, everyone is blessed by encouragement. Everyone needs to be encouraged the entire journey. All of us as grown-ups, as children, that, hey, yes, it can be hard, but we can do it. You can be encouraged. So yes, that is one of my favorite things to do, is encourage students in their journey.
Yeah. So you mentioned the idea of wanting something different and realizing there are probably different pieces along the way where you saw that. You mentioned in student teaching and your master's degree. Could you talk about that? Just how various times you saw, like you said, students could do more, and that you even personally felt that and wanted that for yourself and for the school that you were at.
Yes. Well, in my experience at USC, which I was grateful for and loved, even in some of my master's classes, I was surprised by sort of the lack of engagement that was required even in discussion or conversation, or even expectation of the level of, say, receiving a master's. And it was one of my theory classes, though, I was grateful that Dr. Rossier came and spoke at. She started the Rossier School down in Orange County for her son that had learning needs, severe learning needs. And I believe it still exists. And it really was the first time that it dawned on me, oh, you can do that. My whole experience was public education growing up, so I didn't have a different mindset related to, there's other ways to go about this. So then and there, I felt like, oh gosh, wow, wouldn't that be an amazing thing to do, and to do something different that would be different by design, that you could actually create an influence. And I do think that's when Jesus put on my heart, like, yeah, you could influence children, but also someday if we were to able to do something like that and have kids, I'd want to influence my own kids in their learning. And then when I started my student teaching and was in a classroom, which is my favorite, I thought, oh, wow, how do I have students in junior high and high school not able to do some of the things that they should be doing at that point? And then just the spirit and the culture of the school. So there were a lot of things I thought, oh, you could do differently.
Yeah. So what brought you to the place of kind of understanding this classical Christian way of learning, and how did that kind of check those boxes for you as far as the concerns that you had and what you were seeing in modern education, and how that kind of fit the bill, if you will, for what you were hoping for and what you thought education could or should be? Yes.
Well, I finished my master's in credential and started teaching in our local schools, one of our local schools out here in Santa Clarita. Through that experience, one was fully engaged in all of it and loved it. But then as Wally and I started to think about what we would do when we have a family, then he kept saying, you keep talking about the school idea. When are you going to do something about it? And it was actually at a marriage couples retreat we were on with our church that he's like, Liz, if we're going to do this, we got to go. So I started then researching and investigating and came across, and I love how Jesus works. I was coming home from an early morning workout, and at the time, Ian was very little. So I would go do that real fast while he would go off to where he was working down in LA. And I had heard Douglas Wilson, who really in our modern season is considered sort of the regenerator of classical Christian education. And the school he started up in Idaho, the Logos School, I'd heard him on the radio with James Dobson. And they were talking about this school and this classical Christian model. And it was, again, another light bulb, like, oh my gosh, that is it. Classical Christian education. And on my drive home, I'm like, one, how did I not know about this? Why wasn't this a part of my own learning experience? And I ran in the house and I said, I have it, Wally. I know the model, like what we need to pursue. And that day, I was supposed to start the administrative master's credentialing that my principal had said, get going on this. And I was signed up. Classes were to begin that day in the evening. And I called them and said, I'm not coming. And I got off that phone call and we called the Association of Classical Christian Schools, what had just started, and we ordered a notebook for $15 on how to start a school.
Wow. I've heard you mention that some elements of that experience and hearing Douglas Wilson and with James Dobson, all that. I'm curious, in that conversation, what were some of the highlights for you that stuck out that kind of, again, check those boxes that where you had that light bulb moment to say, that's it, like this is it. And again, even just the frustration, I guess, of saying, why have I not heard about this before? Because obviously there was something in that conversation that struck a chord with you.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. Oh, gosh. Well, first of all, to have a complete education, how it must have an integration of faith and learning. How there is so much more than just separate subjects and the pieces or chunks of what modern education has said it means to be a learned person, that students must have a full grasp and understanding of all those things, just as emerging readers, as understanding grammar, Latin, everything, and how everything goes together, and how they have to be, my goodness, constantly reminded and interwoven, and how just a culture of a school has to embrace all of that. I could keep going.
Yeah, and how it just made sense from an educational approach.
Yes, and how one of the things that I appreciated that made great sense was how you help our students, which what we do in the grammar phase, have a really early foundation and making sure that they're gaining as much mastery as they can on certain subjects, and then also certain topics and how they relate, pieces of literature, the Bible, of course, and then how then in the upper school, how that cycle repeats, and they're then able to understand at a little bit more of a deeper level. And we can't understand it all. My gosh, we're always still learning.
Yeah.
But how it really lays the firm foundation. And the whole idea of rhetoric and writing and the integral part of that, and how they use the formation of ideas and being able to communicate them and using that in all of their classes. It just was so eye-opening.
When it came to you starting Trinity, obviously finding the educational model in and of itself, kind of the core, the heart, I know was a key part. I'm curious, though, when we look at school culture at large, one of my favorite quotes when it comes to education is from G.K. Chesterton. And Chesterton says, education is not a subject and it doesn't deal in subjects. Rather, education is a transfer of a way of life. And so in that understanding of education, we see that it really is a broad culture. I'm interested to know for you, obviously that was a key component, the classical education, kind of the core, the heart, and understanding this is the method. when it comes to that aspect of school culture, what are some other things that you were hoping for from a broader standpoint to see, yes, academically students could do more, but how did you see in developing a place like Trinity, the spiritual component, just the everyday, right? How students are greeted, how they're viewed and respected, and how we treat one another. Because I know you well enough to know those are things that matter to you, because people matter to you, that our students matter, our families matter. And I know that that's an important part of our school and our school culture. So I'm curious what you were thinking in regards to those elements for our school, for Trinity and its development, outside of the core, outside of the classical Christian education piece. What other cultural elements were priorities for you?
Well, one of them, I hope our culture reflects that. I went through my entire education, especially in grammar and secondary education, and then on even through my master's program, where, I wasn't necessarily known. I don't even know if there'd be weeks where teachers wouldn't even necessarily say my name. I actually was a little more on the shy side. I know people are like, oh, really? Like, no, I originally, and it's important. Jesus gives us a name. Our parents give us a name. Jesus knows us. Our parents give us a name. It's important that children are known in their education process. When we said we're going to do this, and I stopped working because I had been working part-time, we sold our house and moved into a little condo, and I went on a little bit of support to help balance out how this idea we were going to do, almost like a missionary, right? And I remember sitting around the table that we had in the condo, thinking through, well, if we were going to have a mission statement and what we hope for our children, well, for our own children, like at the time we just had Ian, what kind of education will lead towards this in a child? Like, for instance, if we knew we were going to have an integration of faith and learning and use this classical idea, what would it produce? Well, we talk about virtue, wisdom, purpose, and courage. Okay, so in order to do that, then it means the people around them, all the teachers and staff, are going to also need to be willing and desirous of seeking a life of virtue, wisdom, purpose, and courage themselves. I can't impart that to the kids in my honors government class or all our children if I'm not willing to do that too, with Jesus's help, pursue those kind of things as a person. So I think that aspect then influences our culture as a school. And also for us, when you were talking about culture, the hope being that the aspect related to courage, if I reflect back on in our mission statement, means you try stuff, you do stuff, you're encouraged to do that, that you pursue your studies with purpose. And also, how do we have patience in this process? I think sometimes as parents, and I even think for myself, I do this to myself and can do it to others, and we do it to our kids. It's like, get there. Already be there with this issue or this challenge in school, whatever it is, and what you're learning or doing. No. It takes time and patience, and we keep praying about it. I just want, my hope and desire is that our school always reflects these kinds of things in who we hire, what we do, our kids, our community.
And I think what I'm hearing and what you're touching on, if we're honest, when we look at modern education, they sometimes want to deny this or with the desire to not have this integration of faith and learning like you're talking about, that education in and of itself, there is a sense of morality, right? There is a sense of, from a biblical Christian worldview, we see clearly that there are real rights and real wrongs, that God has created this world in such a way that those things are true and that they make sense. And so what I'm hearing you say is that part of the classical Christian educational approach is seeing that when we talk about virtue, that there is a real right and there is a real wrong. And so morality is part of that educational process for our students, and that they see that we're not just minds. We're not just thinking beings. God has created us to be more than that. And he cares about more than that in who we are. And so obviously that is forming our students as well.
Yes. And how can you answer the questions of life that matter without having a sense and understanding of how we're created and formed and what God's plan is and what he's clear about and how that influences everything. Mm-hmm. So therefore, who cares about the science experiment unless you understand where and how all of this came about and what it does and how miraculous that it might produce something that's of value or an understanding, all that. And also just what we read and study and the impact of Christianity on the world. And also understanding how it all relates. And again, for us as a school, we can't do it all or cover it all. Mm-hmm. Part of it too, that our journey and what we hope for as a school is this love of learning and how we can instill a love of learning in what we're doing and the gift that we have in learning and ignite that in our students, knowing we can't cover it all, but hopefully they have a heart and a desire and a joy, even though sometimes it's hard. And, I want to learn about something new and pursue it. And that they're given as much, that we can help them gain as much capacity that they can to then be able to go do what Jesus will call them to.
Yeah. So obviously Trinity's been around 20 plus years now. And you had these grandiose visions of what a school could be. And how it could be different and how, we talked about the academics of it, the culture of it, all of that. How has that come to fruition 20 plus years later? Like, how have you seen the Lord work? And I don't know, I guess, is it what you thought it would be? Is the school today what you kind of had envisioned 20 years ago when we first started?
Oh, my goodness. Gosh, I can't believe what Jesus has done, what he's allowed. What he's done through his people. I know I've said this before, but I mean, he's really done something extraordinary with ordinary people who've responded, who said yes. They want something different by design for their own children. They hope for that. Our community, the way it's responded, it really is a glimpse of the kingdom. And I do think our children will see that. They don't know it yet. They might not know it again, the patience part. It takes them sometimes till after they leave us for a bit to realize, oh, wow, I received a lot, and hopefully they're grateful. I really didn't know what to expect. I just knew that we had to do it and then keep doing the next thing.
I love when you always say, you tell our faculty and staff this often, and you just alluded to this a little bit ago about how people take time and how the Lord is always working in us and thankfully through us, those that get to be a part of creating this atmosphere in this school and this culture and this academic progress is what we see for our students. But in that people take time, you also will encourage parents in saying it takes the whole time. Because God forbid we would look at our second grade selves. Even for myself, I think back, like when I was in second grade, I wouldn't want our current families knowing, little Matt in second grade, because the Lord is always working through us. How have you seen that play out over the years? Because I know, like when I first came here, we were just launching rhetoric school. Ninth grade was just starting. And obviously I've had to learn and grow even since that process. But what have you seen now that you're able to see students go through the whole thing, right? Go through the whole Trinity education, Trinity culture, classical Christian education, everything. What type of people have they become? What has been encouraging to you in seeing this come to fruition in the type of students that we produce?
Oh my gosh. Goodness. Beyond what I could imagine. It really does take the whole time. Truly.
And then some.
And then some.
Yeah.
The way that looks a lot of different ways. In precious emails received that just say thank you. I wish I would have appreciated it more, but I appreciate it now. Mm-hmm. When I see now these adult children that are married, that have their own families, that come back to alumni events, that love Jesus and are doing their lives to the best of their ability and pursuing what Jesus has for them. We see it in so many ways. One of the truly greatest ways is when they come back and want to be on our team, and then we get to serve as adults alongside each other, doing this then with them for the next generation. That I really can't put a price on that.
And that it perpetuates itself.
Yes.
In that sense, because none of us are going to be here forever.
No.
And yet the Lord is always working, and yet there's always work to be done.
Yeah.
That's true. I wonder, as you look back, if you were to do it all over again, would you do anything different?
Oh gosh, we would need another podcast for all the mistakes. But I wouldn't do anything different would do it. And I probably would have, knowing that there's always bumps in the road and challenges. Second go around, it might be a little more relaxed about that. That's okay. We'll navigate that. We'll figure it out. Jesus will help us figure that out. I hope to be able to do that as other schools get started in this classical Christian movement, because I think it's key for this rising generation and our culture at large. But yeah, there would be things I would do different, but I wouldn't also take away some of the painful parts or the things that were hard, because that's how we grow. We want to experience joy and God's peace and grace and all of that, but it's not without sometimes a valley or two or three.
Yeah, we never know.
Right.
With that in mind, it's been 20 plus years, but as we look to the future in 20 more years, where do you see or hope or pray that Trinity's headed? Keeping to the roots of what you talk about in the sense of this classical Christian education, but again, also just the culture of how we're trying to provide something different, that families are looking for something different, but serving students into the future. And again, I know you don't, I wish we all knew what was going to come in the next 5-10 years, but just Trinity's place here in Santa Clarita, in Southern California, in the people that we serve, the families that come, where do you see and where do you hope, I guess, Trinity is headed as it looks to future generations, really?
Yes. First and foremost, our hope is, like you said, just staying true to our mission and what we feel the Lord called us to in the first place. And in His kindness, we are the largest presence on the West Coast for the classical Christian movement. And we are in an area that's a hard place to be in Los Angeles. Really, we're in the thick of it as believers in the culture that we're in, and that Trinity could continue to be a lighthouse for families, a community where children come, learn, families are known and cared for, worked through in the different struggles of life, that we can continue to provide and help our students have a wonderful place to learn, and that we can keep offering and doing things. We, Lord willing, do hope to add things to our campus, better science labs, fine arts, the gym, places to meet, children to grow, again, for our community to have a place that they can come back to even when they leave us and call home, because our kids come back and our alumni, they come and they visit us. Just had a student last week visit before they went off to college back again and come see their teachers and be here.
Yeah. Liz, could you share with us just some of the best resources on this topic, whether that's classical Christian education or as we talk about producing students who are virtuous and courageous and purposeful and wise? What are some resources that maybe have just been the most helpful for you as you think through some of those things that you want to share with our listeners?
Oh, sure. Well, I know for myself, when we got this whole journey started of starting a school, I couldn't read enough about classical Christian education, its formation, the ideas behind it, as well as, Dr. George Grant, who's one of my favorites. He's a theologian and author. He he came to mind early on for me. So I started reading some of his materials, as well as one of my favorites is John Piper. And mostly because he also speaks to being a spiritual leader and what that means. And we're all called to that. We all lead in some way, whether it's in our work, in our families, as parents. And so I reread him regularly, but also too, because my own education, did not have the same richness that the classical model offers. So I really have had to spend the last 20 years trying to read some of the classics and the way things that our students are reading. I think that's helped inform me along in the journey. Again, in my position, I get to hire the people that are part of our community. So much smarter people. I've hired much smarter people than myself to do what we do for our students. So grateful that they would choose to serve here and what they do.
You mentioned, as far as resources, reading some of these things, and I guess in some ways getting a classical education yourself over these last 20 plus years. What are some of the authors or books that have influenced you and that you've enjoyed in that process? Maybe even some that our students currently read.
Oh gosh, yes. And grateful to be on the learning journey with my own children and our students. But C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, and honestly, anything by C.S. Lewis, and rereading those with, especially the Chronicles of Narnia, with my own children as they were going through grammar school in particular. G.K. Chesterton, The Everlasting Man. The list is pretty endless. That's a great question.
Yeah, I don't know if this is good or bad. My own son recently told me, I love Lewis and I love Chronicles of Narnia, especially as you read it as an adult, because you catch things that you wouldn't catch as a child. But he recently told me that he thinks we've read that too much and we do that too much here at school. I take that as a compliment in many ways. And then I know you've mentioned another one that you've personally enjoyed, Marcus Aurelius.
Oh, yes, I did. Yes, meditations, his meditations. And again, trying to read things as my students, my own children, were going through the process. And of course, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Again, my own education growing up didn't provide the kind of experience that our students and my own children were able to experience.
Well, Liz, thank you so much for sharing your story, your heart, even the vision for what we see here at Trinity Classical Academy, where we started, where we are, where we're headed. It's been a great, great conversation with you today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Different by Design. To learn more about Trinity Classical Academy, visit us at trinityclassicalacademy.com. And for more information about our approach to classical Christian education, be sure to check out the conversations over at the Classical Academy podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe and share. Until next time.